Amazon Prime dropped their first full official trailer for The Rings of Power earlier this week. Most of the commentary that I'm seeing on YouTube so far is about how good this trailer looks, but with concern that the story is not going to deliver as great an experience as the visuals suggest. For one thing, it looks a little bit too clean. It has that Amazon Prime studio feel, which we've also seen in other TV shows that have been released by the same group. There's concern that maybe the physical sets are going to look a little cheap or dinky in comparison to the cinematography and the CGI that the artists are rendering as part of this experience into Middle-earth. When it comes to the story, we really don't know much. There is very little dialogue that is shared in this trailer. It is possible that the dialogue that we're getting isn't even actually from the show. It could just be dialogue specifically for the trailer. So we kind of have to just wait and see whether or not this is going to be a story that is entertaining or a story that is going to fail to entertain based on logical inconsistencies, poor character work, bad plotting. I don't know. It could be that they're not giving much away in this trailer because the story is amazing, and it could be that they're not giving much away in the trailer because the story is pretty bad, and they know that if they share too much of the dialogue that we are going to not watch it. And since Amazon has invested a ton of money into this franchise, they want people to watch it. So I don't know. It could go either way. What we do get from this story is that it's going to revolve around the central conflict of the rise of Sauron and, from the title, the forging of the Rings of Power, and how the races of Middle-earth will come under the dominion of those rings. That would be my, guess as to what the story is about. We also know that's going to have a collapsed timeline that's not going to be quite in canon with the books, although we do not know to what degree that timeline is going to be collapsed and how much impact that's going to have on the characterizations and all the various things that are happening during the quote-unquote Second Age. Most of the complaints are the same. What we're seeing is too diverse for Middle-earth, and Galadriel's character in particular doesn't seem like the character from the lore of the books as we are introduced to her. I personally like what Amazon corporate is trying to do with diversity for its programming. However, Lord of the Rings is an odd duck to try to appeal these ideals to, or at least in the way that the writers of the show seem to be doing it. Racism is a theme in the original story, elves versus dwarves versus humans and so on, the contentions between tribal peoples that don't trust each other, but have to work together to defeat a greater evil. That is part of the story of The Lord of the Rings, and really all of the stories that take place in Middle-earth. Making these people racially diverse in the way that humans in the real world think of races does spoil the immersion a bit. Of course, you have to note that in the modern world, our notions of racism are invented nonsense, that we are all part of the human race, and many of the things that were used to justify racism in the past and still today are invented. They are things that are not real. How does that impact racial diversity in Lord of the Rings? I don't know. It's a fantasy world, and Amazon is going to take liberties to create whatever story they want to tell using the rights that they have purchased. These choices may work out just fine. We might get a great story from this perspective, if not in a manner that is exactly canon with the source material. As for the character of Galadriel, I personally don't mind the warrior princess version that has been presented in these trailers, but I can see how this interpretation breaks canon for some people. It's not just that Galadriel is supposed to be a mage-type character. Tolkien's works are suffocatingly patriarchal. I remember reading these books for the first time when I was, in middle school, and feeling the lack of just female representation in this story. And that actually carries over into all of the derivative fantasies that are based on Tolkien. Tolkien was not my first exposure to high fantasy. I read Dragonlance and the Belgariad and a bunch of other books earlier in my reading history, and those books actually have more female characters and more variety of female characters than is in Lord of the Rings or in any of the books written by Tolkien. In derivative high fantasy, the women characters that I remember were often outspoken, and often they were powerful, but they were also viewed as anomalies for what women were supposed to be in those worlds. And I think that this was on purpose. In Lord of the Rings, women are barely present, and the ones we're exposed to are difficult to identify with. Like, Galadriel is a mysterious elven sorceress who lives in isolation in Lothlorien. Arwen has no dialogue that I actually remember from the books, and Goldberry is more like this demi-goddess kind of creature than a person. Éowyn is obviously a woman and an interesting character, but her conflict is described in the books as a desire to be a warrior rather than a woman. Like, she had to choose between her heart and her body. This makes her cold and imperious and leads to her desire to die on the battlefield. The movies actually don't capture this well, in my opinion. Éowyn's story is inherently feminist, with a surprise twist ending when she's the one that ends up killing the Witch King and then gets a additional boon when she meets Faramir in the Houses of Healing. And the Silmarillion isn't much better when it comes to female characters. The female characters in the Silmarillion, as much as I can remember, are largely objects of attraction that die tragically because the men who supposedly love them failed to save them. With, of course, the exception of Luthien and Melian and a few scant mentions of Galadriel. While we're on the subject of Luthien, Galadriel, and Melian being exceptions to the rule, it's worth pointing out that the magic of these powerful women makes them witches in their world. Galadriel is even referred to this way in the Fellowship as the Witch Queen of Lothlorien. What's interesting to me is that witches are really only seen in highly patriarchal societies where women are systemically oppressed. Like, that's not a trait of high fantasy, that's true in the real world. If you look up countries with a high belief in witchcraft, where witches are presumed to be real, you will find a correspondingly high system that oppresses women in those societies. It's almost like men in these societies are inclined to fear women, cursing them or whatever, because they know that women are oppressed and are more easily abused in these places. I only point this out as commentary on how setting influences character. If you remove the patriarchy from Middle-earth, is there any reason for Galadriel to study magic and become the Witch Queen of Lorien? What is the relationship between women being oppressed and choosing to learn magic so as not to die tragically, as all the other women in this world seem to do? I can almost guarantee you that Amazon has given this no thought. Their directive instead seems to be to create a fantasy setting that is inclusive and equal, to model what we want society to look like. And I approve generally of that as an idea. But it is a little bit weird given that the story that they are telling takes place in the distant past of a medieval setting that is patriarchal, changing it to this sanitized, equalized society without the fight that would be required to realize that change, removes some of the literary merit of Tolkien's world. But I don't know. We haven't actually seen the story yet. Maybe it'll be decent, even if it ultimately feels like fan fiction set in a similar but not quite the same universe as Tolkien's Middle-earth. I honestly think that this is the best that we can expect, and we'll just have to wait and see. Again, this is a very extemporaneous review of something that dropped this week that I wasn't expecting. If you like my commentary and want to see more from me, please like and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and until next time.